In Python, to define a function, we use the keyword def, followed by the function name and two brackets. And to start the block, we have this colon and followed by the lines which form the function block. For all the following lines, this indentation is necessary to understand that these lines are part of this function. To define a function, we use the keyword def, and let's give it as basic underscore func and two brackets denoting that it's a function. And to start the block, we give the colon. And as you press enter, there's an automatic indentation or the spacing. And anything you type here will become the block of the function. So here I'll say this is a basic function. Great. Now you save this and you run it. You see that there is no output. Now, any guess why there's no output? Yes, you might have guessed it right. When you define a function, anything inside the function will only execute if you actually invoke the function. So you need to invoke. So to invoke, you just type the name, that is basic underscore func. And to say that it is a function, we use two brackets. Save this and you run it now. Now you see that this is a basic function. Perfect. So invoking the function is mandatory in order to execute. Great. Now let me add two more lines. Print inside function, print outside function. Great. Now if you closely look at these lines, these two lines belong to this function because of this spacing. So there's a space over here, there's a space over here, therefore these belong into this function. Now for this particular line, because there's no indentation, this is not into this function, it's outside the function. So when you run it, first this will be executed, then the function call is called, and then this, and then this. So the order of print should be 1, 2, and 3. So let's try this. And as you can see, we have outside function first, then this is a basic function next, and inside function the last. So it's pretty important that you give the indentation correctly. Otherwise, you might end up in a lot of errors. All right. So let me comment this out. We don't need this. Now let's look at functions with arguments. So let's define args underscore func. So you could give any name. I'm just giving it so that it's more readable. Let me give two arguments. I'll call it as arg1, arg2. And start this code. And let's print arg1 and arg2. Save. Now to invoke this function, args func, let's pass 2 and 3, and you run it. You see that 2 and 3 are being printed. Let me add one more line, args func 3 and 4. You run it. You have 2, 3 because you have called this function. Then we have 3, 4 because we have called this function. So the notation to pass the arguments is inside the brackets, you specify what are the arguments you're trying to take. That's it. Now this function doesn't make big sense because when you're trying to perform some operation, you definitely expect some return value, right? So now let's understand how do we define a function with a return value. So for this, let's define a proper function. Maybe I could say add, which takes some two numbers, a comma b. And what I want to do is I want to do the summation. So I'll take a variable called s, which is a plus b, and then I'll return the s. So to call this, let's take result variable is equals to add of 4, 3. Then I'll print the result. Save this and run it, and we get 7. Now if I pass 5 and 6, Save it. It should be 11. Let's try 11. Perfect. So essentially, functions is all about performing an operation and returning the data. And you capture the data and you can do whatever you want to do. Now there are a couple of additional things what you can do. So let me copy this, or let me cut this and paste it over here. Now sometimes there's a possibility that I may not enter both the parameters or both the arguments. What happens now? You see that there's an error. It says that there's a missing required argument, which is B. So what we can do is we can add some default values. So I will add 3 and I save it and you run it. Now you see that the result is 8. How? I'm passing the 5. So the 5 has settled in A, and for the B we did not send anything. So 3 is taken. So 5 plus 3 is 8, that is being printed. Or I could give this as 1. Now if I don't pass any parameter at all, it will take both these values and essentially it should return 4. So let's try. And yes, we have 4 as the answer. So that's how you define a default value, so that by chance if the user is not entering the proper data, you don't end up in errors. Now Python also has an ability to add variable data. Something like, let me define a function called summation, where I take multiple arguments. To take the multiple arguments, we put a star, and let's call this as args, and let's start the block. Now this args has not just one value, multiple values. So you can iterate the loop. So because it's a summation, let's take a variable called s, which is 0 initially. Now I'll use a for loop. Of course, we have not covered the loops, but still just bear with me for 1 or 2 videos. The syntax for the for loop is for a n args. Okay. Now loop is also block, so we give the colon, and then I would say s is equals to s plus a. So what's happening is this is having a list of elements. So each element will come and sit in A, and that we are adding it to the S. So it will basically do the summation. So at the end, what I'll do is I'll just print the S. Now let's try this. Let's say summation, and let me pass 2, 3. And let me save this and run it. You see that 5 is appearing. Now if I give 2, 3, 4, 5, save and run, we have 14. Now you may be wondering what is this for? Because we kept this print, so that is also being printed. Or what you can do is you can just comment this out. Now you run it. This time it is 14. Perfect. So if your program demands multiple parameters to be passed, and if you don't know how many parameters to pass, then we have this best option to pass on as a variable argument function. Now the last concept which I want to cover in the functions is the scope of the variable. For this, let me take a variable and let's print this variable. Let's run it. So we have this 10. Now let's define a function called func. Let me define a variable called 12, and let me print a, and outside this let me print one more time a. Alright, so 3 times. First time, second time, and third time. So before we do this, I want to call the function func. Perfect. Let me comment the previous one so that it won't be visible. Yeah. Now if I run this, so we have 10, that's the first time. Then you're calling the function, therefore this is invoked, and a is assigned as 12, so 12 is printed. And after that, you see that there is a 10. So generally you might expect that because 10 has been updated with 12, even here it has to be 12. But you need to understand that this value, whatever you define within the function, it is a local value. That means as long as the function is there, this value exists, and as you move out of the function, that value will be deleted. So that is the reason why when you come out of the loop, it's actually picking up a value which is there globally. This is the 10. Now what if I want to override this particular value? from here. What we can do is, let me add global keyword to A. So what this will do is, when you're defining the variable, we are saying that that value is basically this one. So any changes should be overwritten onto the global value. So if I run it, this time you see that the output is 10, then 12 and 12, because this 12 is overwritten onto the global value. Perfect. Now try these questions which have appeared in the interviews.